Welcome to the Jaron Jarvis channel. I am Jaron Jarvis. Today, I would like to introduce to you, Sheila. My therapist encouraged me to write about what happened. She said it could help me. I was not so sure myself, but my parents said that if my therapist had suggested it, I should at least try it, so here I am. I have talked about what happened before, to my therapist, to the police, but I have never told it all at once, so I am unsure where to start. Maybe I'll just start with that day, when me and Sheila went into the woods searching. We had been walking about 10 minutes into the woods when Sheila grabbed my arm, forcing me to stop. "Look, there is another one." Sheila pointed at a rock by the side of the path. I looked at the rock for a second before I answered. "A rock? What do you mean?" "No, stupid. Behind the rock." Sheila, having hit puberty at an early age and being 7 months older than me, was significantly taller. With careful movements I stepped forward, my eyes darting around the scene. I froze when I saw the crumpled transparent plastic. It looked innocent enough, but we both knew better than that by now. "What are you waiting for? Go get it." I hurried forward. As I picked up the plastic between my index finger and thumb and lifted it slowly, gravity unrolled a tiny bag. Something was contained in the bag, something that had dyed part of the plastic a see-through red. "Pour it out on the rock." I did as I was told straight away. 3 clinking sounds revealed something white covered in blood. I dropped the bag. "Teeth!" exclaimed Sheila. "Who do you think they came from?" My voice was shaking as I looked up at Sheila. "What do you mean who?" "They're from an animal obviously, look at them." Sheila pointed once again with a certain movement. I had never met or even seen another female close to my own age that I would label woman before. Sheila on the other hand was not only a woman, she was a strikingly beautiful young woman. She could even pull off wearing red lipstick without looking foolish, something she liked to sport when only adults we did not know were looking. I have always had a mousy quality to my appearance, but next to Sheila I sometimes literally looked like her shadow. However, I soon understood it was better to be considered the shadow of a goddess than a lonely mouse. Sheila bent down, preventing her hair from falling in her face by holding it back with her hands, and looked as close as she could without any part of her body touching the previous content of the bag. Her gaze was that of a scientist, someone examining the world around her, evaluating it. "Probably raccoon," she declared. She stood up and fixed her gaze in mine. "What do you think he wants? Why do you think it's a he?" I replied rapidly. "Well, I don't know. That's a valid point. It might be a she. Or a them." Her eyes gleamed hungrily. I could not help but smile. Sheila did not only look unlike anybody else I had ever met, she also acted unlike anybody else I had ever met. The first time I met Sheila was the same day my family had moved to the small town. Sheila had walked right in through our open door and started talking to my parents with an ease that made her seem like a parent herself. I was observing from another room through an almost closed door. I remember thinking that this brilliant creature must be at least 3 years older than myself. If we stood next to each other, an unknowing observer probably would have assumed an even larger age gap. When my mother had called my name, eager to shove a new friend, especially one so shiny, her daughter's way, I had clenched my fist. I thought I was doing fine behind the door. I was not lonely, no matter what my parents said. Before going into the other room I relaxed my body, reminding myself that a girl like this would only have to spend 30 seconds with someone like me, before she would never bother me again. 30 seconds later I realized my assumptions were inaccurate. 1 hour later I realized I had been entirely wrong. It might have been as early as that same afternoon that I realized it would all start again. Nightfall was a rapid shift in the Ovapa woods, but we were still on the path and we each had got a lighter to show us the way if it got any darker. I only knew the area fairly well, but Sheila had been living here her entire life. She had once told me that the only risk of dying out here was if you were stupid enough to lose your way. Still, neither of us had told our guardians that we were out there, agreeing that unnecessary concern was best avoided. Sheila was at my house, while I was at Sheila's. In reality, I had actually never been inside Sheila's house. Even though we spent most days together, I knew surprisingly little about her. I was painfully aware of this and it annoyed me, but at the same time it was part of what made her so alluring. Sheila lived with her grandmother, but what had happened to her parents or even whether they still were alive or not was uncertain. My parents told me that it was probably a sensitive subject for Sheila and that she might need time to open up about it. Out of 3 categories, my parents clearly fell into the one that adored Sheila. Those few who did not adore her, were apprehensive around her even though that mostly was manifested through simply keeping a distance. In the 3rd category was me. I was the only one Sheila had chosen to include when the first, as Sheila liked to call them, clue presented itself. "I want to show you something after class," she had whispered with that voice that made the people belonging to the first group feel like they had been chosen. I was chosen. "Look at this," she had said while pulling something out of her bag. We had walked into the woods behind the school, the woods that caressed and veined our small town. Sheila had told me she liked to be here when she needed time alone, but lately it had become our spot when we wanted to be alone, when we were sharing secrets. Sheila held a doll in her hand. Its entire body was wrapped in duct tape except for a tuft of hair poking out from its head. "I found this in my bag today," she continued, and watched my reaction. "Who put it there?" I stared at her. "I don't know." She smiled and moved her gaze towards the doll. "But I think we are participating in a game." "We?" I made her eyes even bigger. "Yes, we, as in you and I. I'm taking you along. You like games, don't you?" I would have lied if I had said no. Sheila was still enjoying the game as we were now walking through the woods, each of us with a lighter in our hands. At least it seemed like she was enjoying it, pacing onwards and leading the way. Our path had by this point diverged from the trail. I could tell that Sheila thought she knew what she was doing. I had not met many people with as good sense of direction as Sheila. The only person I could compare it to, honestly, was my own. I remember being 8 years old and directing the way to the amazement of my parents when we had been out on family road trips. I had spent most of my life in a middle-sized town, and because of this, my cartographic skills were best adapted to that type of landscape. Since moving to this small town I could almost see my mind change with the new environment. Already I could find my way around the Ovapa woods by myself quite well. Sheila stopped and raised her lighter as far as her arm would reach. She twisted her head round her shoulders back and forth in a graceful and precise semicircle motion. "We should be close," she replied curtly to my raised eyebrows. She did not look at me even for a second, constantly scanning the woods in front of her. For a moment Sheila lost her masterful manners and jerked forward in a sudden and slightly clumsy movement. She regained herself at once like nothing had happened. It was just a fraction of a moment. If you would have blinked you would have missed it. I did not blink, another one of my talents. "You are very observant, Jess. Maybe you can figure out who's giving us these clues." SHEILAH had asked me a couple of weeks and a couples of the so-called clues after the first one had arrived. We had hiked up into the woods together investigating the latest gift of the game, safe from interfering and imbecilic eyes as Sheila put it. She pulled out the latest clue from her bag, and for the first time it was something covered by a plastic bag. I remember Sheila handling the bundle cautiously, almost tenderly, as she pulled back the plastic to reveal its content. The wings were spread out to each side, its head hanging slightly down, staring at them with empty sockets. The intestines had been completely devoured, leaving a rib cage with nothing left to protect. I understood Sheila's stare meant I was supposed to comment on the feathered carcass. "Do you think it's a catbird? Or maybe a mockingbird?" Sheila's eyes widened even more. "That's what you're going to say?" She held back laughter with a snorting sound, then composed herself and looked seriously at me. "It reminds me of Jesus on the cross." "Really? I guess it kind of does." As I leaned over to look more closely, Sheila's gaze turned black. Getting noticed was still a novel sensation to me, but it was one that I had come to like. Before I met Sheila, I had thought being invisible was the most effective approach for my being. Before Sheila, it probably was the most effective tactic. I had realized quite early on in my life how people seemed to accept it without questioning. My parents, whom I knew loved me more than anything, and I had ended up in a silent agreement that this was in everyone's best interest. I knew I could not blame what had happened in my old hometown on the setup. Human error was guilty of the unfortunate outcome which caused us to move to the Ovapa Woods. The distance after moving had helped me accept it. I now tried to focus on what I could learn from it. Sheila stopped again. She swirled around, her long hair following in a delayed movement, to meet me face to face. "I'm not lost," she almost shouted. "I know it's supposed to be here. Here is where the clue said it would be. We found that which has been silenced, the teeth, so where is it? It said it would be the grand finale." "Why are you asking me that, Sheila?" The question composed Sheila to her typical smart self, gathering strength from her downward gaze at the girl in front of her. I did not wait for an answer as I continued. "I mean, you are absolutely right in doing so. In hindsight I had taken every precaution I virtually could. Starting a friendship with Janet went without question. We were the only two silent and awkward girls in class. The storage of suitcases in the basement took a bit more figuring out. I got the idea when Janet's father had just gotten home from a business trip. He unpacked and asked Janet to take the empty suitcase down for storage. After that I had carefully chosen a time I knew would be uninterrupted and a carefully curated cover. I had invited Alex, the undoubtedly coolest girl in class, over to Janet's after school with a promise to drink booze. It was the only thing, with the exception of a promise to meet older boys, that would make Alex come within 5 feet of us. I had a fight with Janet that day in front of everyone and made a big deal of stomping off on my own in the direction where my house was, only to reconcile with her short after when no one was looking. At Janet's house that afternoon Alex did not wait long before collecting what she came for. "Where's the booze? You better have something or I will tell everyone what gross lesbians you two freaks are." Even Janet looked slightly surprised when I actually had it. I had brought an entire bottle of vodka just to be sure. After gulping it down for about an hour, Alex passed out on Janet's bed. She was intoxicated enough to stay that way until someone came home and found her, by which time I would be long gone. It was almost too easy. Janet was immensely grateful to me for bringing Alex inside her room and did not bat an eyelash when I suggested we should go down to the basement. The prepared game of who would fit into which suitcase was almost not needed. Janet was happy to jump into a suitcase on demand and did not protest when it was locked around her. I waited until the skeptical questioning started, until the banging and screaming started. Then I quietly left the basement. As I was about to silence the screams with the heavy basement door, a noise made me turn around. "Hey, how's it going?" Janet's older brother standing in the hallway caught me completely off guard. "Why are you not in school?" "Wow, you sound like my mom," he laughed. "Spanish teacher was ill so we got to." He got quiet and squinted his eyes. "What's that sound?" "Nothing." I cursed herself for answering so fast. Janet's brother moved past me, down into the basement. In a way it was a blessing that I had failed the first time. With someone who enjoyed the game, someone like Sheila, the reward would be much bigger.